If you've watched Studio Ghibli's new film, The Boy and the Heron, you're most likely filled with unanswered questions or just simply confounded by what you've just watched. Searching through Reddit and becoming a little frustrated with some illustrious and nonsensical interpretations made me want to make a video about my interpretation. So that is what this is. It doesn't make it correct, I know that's for sure, but it does seem to make sense and answer a lot of questions that some may have. It's important to discuss first, however, the significance of the original title of the film, How Do You Live? This title is based on a book that Miyazaki was given as a child, a book that shaped and formed his values and behaviour as a young boy. The very philosophical title really shapes your understanding of the film if you have this context. You don't even really need to consider what the contents in the book is about to understand that this film questions our purpose in life. Ghibli worlds tend to include purposelessness and oddities throughout, forcing the viewers to appreciate the randomness of the world and our universe. So there are a lot of philosophical approaches to this specific movie. This video is broken up into 7 different parts with the headings The Heron, The Mother, The Fisherwoman, The Stepmother, The Autobiography, The Parakeets, and lastly, The Grand Uncle. So get comfortable, make yourself a cup of tea, and sit down for the analysis of The Boy and the Heron. Starting off, the Heron. This is undeniably one of the most significant characters within the film, as he acts as a type of bridge between worlds. The Heron is a motif throughout the film, one which I think is symbolic of grief. Several times in the beginning of the film, the Heron agitates Mahito and lures him further to the tower. The Heron seems to pester Mahito when he is at his most vulnerable, pushing and pressuring the young boy. The Heron tells the young boy that he knows where his mother is, that he can take him there, which immediately the viewers know is a lie, since she passed away a year ago. Yet, the Heron never really lied about it. There is a constant motif of whether the Heron is a liar or honest, and his vexatious personality doesn't really help his cause since it paints him to be a trickster. By the end of the film, we can assume that perhaps the Heron isn't quite who we expected him to be, and I think that this ties in heavily with grief, and how it can often come to us as this aggravating and harmful emotion, but is also just our love for someone or something that is no longer present within our lives. To overcome this grief, Mahito eventually befriends the Heron, almost as a signifier of his acceptance of grief within his life. Knowing that he cannot ignore it, nor can he get rid of it, he accepts its presence within his life. His acceptance of the Heron propels the story further, because Mahito's acceptance of the Heron means that they can work with one another as opposed to another. I do believe that the Heron as a symbol of grief makes sense, especially since those within this strange realm seem to be accustomed to him, as if they have also accepted grief within their own lives. The Mother. It is important to note that within this paradigm there is a time paradox at play. We aren't entirely certain how this works, but essentially those who come to the world are all experiencing it simultaneously. Lady Hime is Mahito's mother in a younger form. We are given the context that she went missing for a year when she was younger, and no one knew where she had gone. Lady Hime came to this place, it is suggested, because she was grieving the death of her own mother within the real world. We can infer that Lady Hime's presence in this world is similar to Mahito's, as the two of them grieved the death of their mothers. Another aspect that suggests how time functions differently, almost as a constant existence in the past, present, and future, is that Lady Hime has the power of fire. It is an obvious foreshadowing of her death in fire, however, it is also indicative of the paradigm's connection to future events. It's difficult to explain, but essentially this paradigm is connected to all of time. The past, present, and future exist simultaneously with this other world. Lady Hime having the gift of fire serves as a type of empowerment where even in death she is brought back to this power of hers to draw the fear out of her death, and when Mahito confronts her with this terrifying thought of dying in fire, she replies with a smile, "Fire doesn't scare me." Now this very line brought up a lot of emotions for me, and looking back on the film would have provided a lot of closure for Mahito. Understanding that his mother is prepared to die this way and is looking forward to her life with him, Mahito has closure that not many grievers are given. The Fisherwoman. Some understandings of the Fisherwoman, Kiriko, suggest that she is a type of mother for those in the underworld. This is an interpretation as Kiriko finds Mahito as he enters this new world, has lived here for some time and cares for the Warawara throughout their life in this realm. Despite her roughness, Kiriko is a maternal and caring figure within this world. However, Kiriko is the elderly lady that follows Mahito into the forest and in turn the tower. She disappears completely when Mahito enters this new world, and it's almost as if she is manifested back to her younger self, with no recollection of her existence. Kiriko, in this other realm, also wears the same pattern as the elderly Kiriko's kimono. The beauty of ambiguity seems to shine here as it does with Ghibli worlds, as we aren't given an explanation why Kiriko is here. Perhaps she is grieving too, in a different stage of her life, and resides in this world until she can accept grief. Stepmother. Natsuko felt the burden and responsibility that she had to her sister when stepping in as Mahito's mother. I think one thing that we may be forgetting when we watch this film is that Natsuko was also mourning the loss of her sister while taking the familial responsibility. At first I didn't really like Natsuko as she seemed overbearing to Mahito as he struggled through grief. However, the transition between his mother's death and meeting Natsuko was purposeful. It happened almost simultaneously, just as it would have felt for Mahito himself. But I began to warm up to her more, almost as if I was with Mahito, as she showed tremendous efforts of care and mindfulness throughout the beginning of his transition. There were many questions regarding Natsuko, including why the father married his wife's sister, why she was in this world, why her attitudes towards Mahito changed so dramatically, and many more. So here are my answers to these questions. It was a very common belief that when a wife passed away, her family would step in to help with the responsibility of the children. It definitely wasn't uncommon that the husbands would marry their wives' sisters. This is something that is looked down upon in Western society, but keep an open mind to this concept. Natsuko was stepping up to her familial obligations. My interpretation of the film is that Natsuko entered this realm probably because she was on the verge of a miscarriage or her own death during childbirth. When Mahito finds Natsuko, she is in a delivery room secluded from everyone. I believe that Natsuko and her unborn child were in a type of limbo, and that no one was to interfere with it. Mahito broke this unspoken rule and seemed to change the fate of her state. This kind of ties in with why Natsuko's attitudes towards Mahito changed so dramatically. I think that Natsuko was fully aware that she and or her child were in limbo. So when Mahito came in, she could think of no way to make him leave other than expressing her disdain for him. In a way, Natsuko might have tried preventing him from seeing death another time, or from passing away himself. Throughout the film, Natsuko was very loving and caring, seemingly always worried about him, so it does coincide with this theory that her irritation towards him was in the efforts of his protection. Autobiographical. Many viewers have speculated that this is an autobiographical story of Hayao Miyazaki, since many parallels have been drawn between the two. It is true that Miyazaki experienced his own hardship and grief when he was younger, as he vividly remembers the war in Japan during the 1940s. He suffered from the side effects and saw firsthand what the impacts of war had on his home country. However, Miyazaki has criticized many times his disdain for artists self-inserting their autobiographical events into a new world. Sure, you can subconsciously include your own experiences and interests, you might even include small snippets, but to create a film that entirely explores his life and self-criticism is just not in the interest of Hayao Miyazaki. However, there is something that I will discuss in terms of a connection between characters later in this post, but I don't believe at all that the film was entirely dedicated to his life and biographical events. Parakeets. The parakeets within The Boy and the Heron were undoubtedly oblivious and foolish, often only finding direction in their leader as opposed to deciding directions themselves. The parakeets reminded me of the hive mentality, as it seemed like they couldn't function as individuals, but rather as a group. There really isn't anything too deep about this, I just think it shows the impact of a dictatorship or totalitarian forces, as we see with the king of the parakeets. They were cannibalistic and never thought individually or challenged what they were being told, a classic case of the manipulation of masses that we see so prevalent during war. They are representative of the flaws of the Grand Uncle, as he created this world, almost as a reminder to him that malice remains within his creations, but as they are returned to their natural state, the purity of their nature also returns. Lastly, the Grand Uncle. Some theories have suggested that the Grand Uncle is a manifestation of Miyazaki himself as he reflects on his life, his creations, and eventually his death. Approaching 83 years soon, Miyazaki has been faced with retirement several times and yet has always returned. His obsession with his art and creations remains a core value within him. There is something rather endearing about Miyazaki's dedication to his art, and I feel like we see that in the Grand Uncle. Clearly attached to his own creations and desperate to maintain their existence, the Grand Uncle has difficulties accepting the death of his work. It is said in the film that the Grand Uncle works for just another day, and I think that many people live like this, take one day at a time. There is a lot to talk about when it comes to the Grand Uncle, but I feel compelled to speak about his decision to create this world. As a godlike figure who helped aid the creation of the realm, it can be interpreted that he is symbolic of God, or humans playing God. We are told that the Grand Uncle created the tower over a meteor that had struck Earth. Despite the amount of deaths that happened in the making, the Grand Uncle continued with the construction of the structure. Then he trespassed into the mystical territories of this new realm to seemingly create a world that was, unfortunately and inevitably, malice. The Grand Uncle has strong ties to the parakeets, seemingly more so than the Wara Wara, and even the humans themselves. So perhaps the genesis of these immoral parakeets came from the Grand Uncle himself. When speaking about the world, he comments, "Worlds are living things, and they can be infected by mold and bugs." There is a whole motif of malice and how one must control a world without it, but that is quite straightforward. I think that the Grand Uncle could partially represent those who play God and continue to do the work of God, despite being immoral in their makings or subconsciously corrupt. How humans are incapable of creating something free of malice, and thus our efforts to play God can never really end well or be pure. The Grand Uncle is not an antagonist in the film, which is what emphasizes his naivety as a creator. He does all in his power to maintain a pure world, but as a human is just incapable. I find that this is where the parakeets become symbolic of how we humans change nature, often for the worse. The personification of the parakeets within the Grand Uncle's world corrupts them, but when they are freed, they return to their natural pure state. Miyazaki is a strong misanthrope, and I have to agree with him, as humans have the tendency to do nothing but corrupt. As an environmentalist, Miyazaki must surely be commenting on humans' ability to corrupt and destroy nature. Simultaneously, Miyazaki is looking at the worlds that he has created through Studio Ghibli, knowing that these are what will remain of him when he passes, and that no one can take over his work, and that's okay. The Grand Uncle within this film is aware of the hasty approach of his death. He must find an heir to keep the balance and continue his work, but this never happens, and his wishes are left unfulfilled, and that's okay. Mihito chose what he wanted in life, not what he felt obliged to do. I think it is this part of the film that really resonates with the original title of How Do You Live? I think Miyazaki alleviated many anxieties that humans have when it comes to death and this idea of accomplishment. It reassures us that even if something remains unfinished or is not carried by others, that is completely fine. Not many would be able to come to terms with this fact, and this is what causes so much chaos in the world, the inability to accept life as what it is, returning back to the philosophy that life is purposeless, but you can create your own purpose, and we will never really know the meaning of the universe and that is truly okay. I hope that you enjoyed this analysis of The Boy and the Heron, and that this answered a few questions that you might have had. If you have any questions or would like me to dive into anything else, I would love for you to leave a comment. I really appreciate that you watched all the way through. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.